exciting. I just love this church. Half from the minute I walked into it. I didn't become involved with this church until 1985, I think it was. Grew up as a Methodist and then wasn't anything for a long time. Then came to St. Thomas. And was only going to stay here as long as the priest that I liked was here. And by the time he left, I was hooked. So the way we're going to do this today is Bunker Hill is going to start by doing a general overview of the Episcopal Church in the Americas, number 1, and then St. Thomas Episcopal 2. And what we'd like to do is have this be kind of a non-structured discussion and question and answer. So as we go along, if you have a question or you have a comment or a memory, we welcome you to give that to us. And Karen Moore is going to talk about Bishop Hare and the consecration of the church. We have a document in the back of the church, and I wasn't able to get good copies of it, so it's interesting to look at. So as you go out, you can look at it. And then Judy Hughes is going to talk about the rare dots here, and I will be talking about the stained glass windows. And then we'll just kind of generally be talking about other aspects of the pews, which go back to the beginning, and the baptismal font, which goes back to the beginning pretty much. And so there you have it. Okay. All right. Bunker?
I'm going to cut out. I am the occasionally Reverend Bunker Hill. Not always. So if you feel the need to curse, just I just want to sort of give you a general idea about the Episcopal Church. And you can refer to your FAQ for any details that you want. And of course, it would take books and books to cover the whole thing. So I just want to say the answer to the question, did Henry VIII getting a divorce start the Episcopal Church? And the answer is no. The church in England goes back to the early Romans, who, when they conquered England, the land that was there, they brought with it some of their converted soldiers. And so the church started very early in England. And the church in England was the Catholic Church, and in continuity with the early church all the way. And when Henry came along, obviously, what he did was say that the church would not be ruled from Rome, it would be ruled from London, namely with him as the supreme ruler of the church. And this was, it's a debated thing, but we say that we are the continuity of that church that was founded originally back in AD 4 or something on that line. Maybe not quite that far. You get the idea. And so the church in America, likewise, broke away from the church in England, and we are the church in America. We are the Anglican Church in America. And so that's the long and short of the history of it. And the church in South Dakota is a small branch of the church, because our Episcopal Church is divided up into dioceses, which some, in this case, is the state of South Dakota. Because we're a special church in that we're a missionary church to the Native Americans, we also lap over into Nebraska and a little bit in North Dakota. And so just laying out the geography of it. this country, South Dakota, was proselytized or evangelized, whichever word you'd like to use, by the General Seminary in New York. They were the ones sending out missionaries, and the General Seminary in New York was their spirit was a very Catholic spirit. And so when they did come out here, the people in who were settling out here, and the people who brought the Episcopal Church out here, were very high church. And you'll see some of the pictures, and you can see quite a bit of finery, I should say. And I came out here from Virginia. Now, Virginia, very low church. And of course, these days, the low church and the high church are sort of blending together as things work like that, where people are in the same organization. But there has been a lot of tension between the evangelical parts of our church and the Catholic part, or high church parts, and the more progressive people, and people were very difficult. And so we have all the wars that go on in the world in our church. And that's not a bad thing, because we believe that when Christ said that we should be united, he didn't mean you should divide up into separate churches and be united that way. He said, be united and just welcome one another, be part of one another. So we are a very ecumenically minded church. We sort of regard ourselves as a bridge between the Catholic and the Protestant denominations. We have a document that says we will forego all preferences of our own, but it lays out four basic things about the church that are unchangeable. One is the scriptures, one is baptism and the Eucharist, one is the historic episcopate, and one is the creeds of the church. Those are the essential parts of what we call the sacred deposit. And all of these things that you see here are preferences. Some people cross themselves, some don't. That's a preference. Now, in some churches, you better cross yourself. In other churches, don't you dare cross yourself. So, since a lot of South Dakota is importing its priests from Virginia, well, we change things when we come. And so we have, I personally have kind of a high church leanings, because I went to General Seminary for my first year of seminary. And General Seminary was, as I said before, the high church kind of seminary. And I have seen things done in churches that you would not believe. I went to St. Mary the Virgin Episcopal Church, and they had not one, but two thuribles going, smoke, and they processed around the church and went to this station, and then they went to that station, and I'm going, And when I arrived, one of the first things that happened to me was the Brother Charles SSF came to preach at General Seminary. And he was a large fellow, but he wore all of the regalia. And he preached a great sermon. And then when he processed out, he blessed the people on the right. And then he blessed the people on the left. And I'm a good old Virginia boy, and I don't know what's going on here, because the people he was blessing were genuflecting to him, and I was just sort of left not wondering what to do about all that, and then pretty soon I got used to it and got to like it, when I went back to Virginia, I finished out at Virginia, they had a different kind of chapel. They had a minister of the week, and we did whatever the minister of the week wanted to do, instead of what we should have done every week. And I didn't go to chapel for a whole year. I did have a professor who, he was very on the Protestant side, and he bragged that he only had one clergy shirt. And I used to go up to him and say, good morning, Father Carr. He said, don't call me that. Oh, excuse me, Father, I'm sorry. Anyway, you get the idea. We have retained the orders of ministry. We have bishops, priests, and deacons. And the fact that we are ruled by bishops is what Episcopal means, Episcopos. By the way, I am an Episcopalian. This is not an Episcopalian church. It is an Episcopal church. Episcopalian is the noun. Episcopal is the adjective. Possibly the adverb. Whereas if you're a Presbyterian, you go to a Presbyterian church. If you're a Lutheran, you go to the Lutheran church. Yada, yada, yada. We have a distinction. So I realize that rules all of you out. You wouldn't be able to come to this church. Couldn't stand that. I'd have to change my language. And you notice in your pews you've got kneelers. We have what's called pew aerobics. We stand to sing, we sit to listen, we kneel to pray. And that's what those kneelers do. I went to one of my friends' ordinations in a Methodist church and sat down. The first thing I looked around and said, where are the kneelers? They didn't have any kneelers. By the way, we are children of the Catholic Church. The Methodists are children of the Episcopal Church, or the Anglican Church. You know what the method of Methodism is? It was to use the Book of Common Prayer in their daily life. And it's changed a little bit since then, but originally that's what it was. They were trying to bring serious practice, spiritual practice into the lives of people. And the prayer books are in your pew there. They're the red ones. I don't think there's other. Yeah, the other ones are blue. The prayer book is this book of common prayer. What we hold in common. It is what holds us together and what distinguishes the Anglican communion. Now there's a little bit of variety going along these days. The English church still uses the 1662 version. Ours is 79. But essentially, it is the same liturgy. There's an old Christian maxim, lex orandi, lex credendi. The law of prayer, let's see, the law of prayer is the law of believing. And basically that is the Bible. The prayer book is not a substitute for the Bible. But when we're praying, we're speaking to God. And we're not lie to God. We're going to speak to God in what we believe is the truth about ourselves and about God. You'll find in the prayer book a lot of scripture. Our weekly services involve on Sunday what many churches would call Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper, the Holy Eucharist, or the Mass, take your pick. We have people who use all those languages. And one of the ways that we hold our church together is that we have people who have God with different perspectives. And the Eucharist, which is kind of holds a lot of tension for a lot of people, and a lot of that. It's so important that people hold on to their theologies about it. And we tend to take both things. Like I will say, the gifts of God for the people of God. Take them in remembrance that Christ died for you, and feed on him in your hearts by faith with thanksgiving. Now the reason I say all that is some people approach the Eucharist as an objective reality. In other words, that bread, that wine is really the body and blood of Christ. Other people say, well, it's a memorial or something like that. It's not, because you can see that it's still crackers and wine. And I can go into transubstantiation if you want to. But the point of that is, when I say the gifts of God for the people of God, take them in remembrance that Christ died for you, the remembrance part is the one, the subjective, but the body of Christ, the bread of heaven, is the objective. So both of them are together. And that's what we try to do, is hold these diversities that we have within our church. I like to say we go all the way from Anglo-Baptist to Anglo-Catholic and everything in between. And frequently, when we get a Catholic person marrying a Baptist person, they end up in the Episcopal Church. Right over there. I've seen several instances of that, and some of them are kind of hilarious. But sometimes we are hilarious people. Maybe you bring some questions yourself that you would like to know about the Episcopal Church.
Is everyone allowed to take your communion or whatever you call it?
All baptized Christians are welcome to receive Eucharist
You
in the
don't have
Episcopal
to
Church.
be, okay.
Right. And I think there's a few that sneak in that aren't even baptized. There's a small group of people in the Episcopal Church that want to practice open communion. That is, Jesus he ate with sinners, right? It's the only kind of people he ate with. In fact, it's the only kind of people we serve in this church. We're all sinners. And we come for forgiveness. And that's what the Eucharist is all about. Any other questions?
Do you baptize children or only adults?
Absolutely, we baptize children. If you had to understand what it was all about, you would know more than the priest. We believe that the best you could do is be somewhere along the spectrum between as you are a baby, not knowing, but receive, and in a receptive position to the latest professor who's just arguing with somebody else about the meaning of this or that. So we welcome all people to our church.
Could you say something about the Niagara
That's what I'm wearing right here.
cross?
I'm going to do a timeline shortly. This is the Niagara Cross, and it was designed especially for ministry here in this diocese. If you look real closely at it, first of all, it's supported by a bead chain kind of thing, and it's got 4 teepees in there representing the 4 directions, and it is a cross, and there's a little more to learn about it, but I've forgotten it all. But at any rate, this cross was designed for this diocese, and this is the only place you get this cross, and it's given to each confirmand who is confirmed. Now we do have 7 sacraments. 2 of them are essential, baptism and Holy Eucharist. And the other 5 are optional. What is a sacrament? It's an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. And we believe that marriage is a sacrament, confession is a sacrament. I got 7 of them, and I always leave one out. So there's marriage, confession, confirmation, holy unction, which is anointing with oil. James said you should anoint the sick with oil and pray for them. And what's the one that I left out so far? Ordination, of course. I was ordained. I was. And so I'm a priest of the Episcopal Church. I was ordained first as a deacon, and after serving 6 months, we have 2 ways that we approach the diaconate. And one is the deacon. There's a perpetual deacon, and that is a person set aside for service. And then we have what we call the transitional deacon, which is what if you're going to be a priest, you should be ordained as a deacon first. And that brings into your head the fact that you are a servant and not a ruler. I'm the rector of the church. I'm powerful. No, I'm a servant. And in fact, we have a governance in this church that probably is similar to most of the churches. We have a vestry of lay people who are the governors of the church, and they hire me. We have a free agent system. I came from Virginia. It's not like, say, the Methodist Church where they move everybody around, or the Catholic Church, the same deal. Any ordained priest can serve any diocese virtually in the world. One of the priest that was here when I arrived in South Dakota is now serving a church in England. So he went across the water. And we had many of the churches, priests here come from England. I think there was even a Scot in there. And of course, one of the most famous later priests was very Scottish, Tom Campbell, who he goes around in a kilt. I'm semi-Scot. I think I'm more Welsh than Scots.
What kind of history are you aware of with the Episcopal Church and the Native American community?
Well, there was a decision among the churches, the mainline churches primarily, that the mission field for Native Americans should be divided up among the denominations. So it would be unseemly for denominations to be fighting for territory. And so the South Dakota was given to the Episcopal Church. I think the Presbyterian Church got Montana, I'm not sure, the Crow people, and things like that. And of course the Catholic Church did its own thing. So typically the churches in the Diocese of South Dakota are Episcopal churches. But there is inroads, obviously, like there's inroads in this town of non-denominational congregations and things like that. We say that we are a large diocese of small churches. And we are the mission of the Episcopal Church at large. In other words, we get half of our funding from the national church. We can't afford to support ourselves. And that this church supports itself. The church I served in Spearfish supports itself. And those are not mission churches per se, but we are part, as a diocese, part of the national church's mission to the Native American population in South Dakota. And obviously these kind of things bring tension. Over the years, people came came out here with one understanding, and maybe not the understanding of the people who lived here. We had some Indian schools where the hair was cut short and they weren't allowed to speak Lakota or Dakota or Nakota, the three languages of the native peoples here. And those schools are now closed. And if you talk to people on the reservation, there are still people who are influenced by having gone to those schools, and they tend to be very involved in the church, whereas the ones who didn't go to those schools, not so much. There's tension within the Native communities about that, and that's just generally a tension in this whole state about racism and the discrimination that Native American peoples feel, and the frustration that the white congregations and the white people in this state feel about how can we work this out? Because I think a lot of people have tried, and it's a difficult situation. But we live with it. We are a majority Native American diocese. Now, this church has a few Native Americans, tend to be from the schools, the mission schools, but not very many. And that was true in Spearfish as well. Down in Martin, they live really close with the Native American people. So it's sort of a geographic thing. Any other questions?
Oh, no, it's not a question, I'm just feeling the need to go out at
Okay,
the same time.
I'll be happy to do that. Let me just I'm going to run through what I call the building timeline. The St. Thomas was organized in 1887 as the St. Thomas Episcopal Society. Later that year, Bishop Hare, William Hobart Hare, arrived by stage for his first official visit. The description of that is kind of hilarious. His second visit came a year later, though, and this time he was able to visit by train. By 1889, one person had been confirmed: prayer books, hymnals, altar books, choir. There was a fledgling congregation of about 12. A year later, the church building was constructed and completely paid for. It was consecrated by Bishop Hare at 5 o'clock on Saturday evening, January 2nd, 1892. And we know that because it's right back there in that on the wall. Records show that William Grams Sr. constructed a large part of the edifice, and many of his progeny are still here. On January 6, 1893, Frederick North Tumman moved to Sturgis. He formed a close connection with Fort Meade, and in return accepted an offer from the bandmaster of the 8th Cavalry to take charge of our music, sending us detachments from the band every Sunday. How's that for a music program? In 1895, a 2-year-old Horace Tumman died of diphtheria, and in their grief, the Tummans commissioned a carved oak font in memory of their beloved Horace, and there it stands today. It's still in use for baptism and reads, "One Lord, one faith, one baptism." Moving ahead to 1907, Edward Cross became the minister, and under Cross, a parish hall was added to the church structure, which is that part of it over there at the time. It served as an athletic center for the whole community. The building was equipped for basketball, had gym mats, Indian clubs, dumbbells, swinging rings, a horse parallel bars, and other equipment. Doesn't have it now. We don't even store it. The church held evening classes of algebra, geometry, and drawing.
For men.
Wait, I hear it. Quote, "It is strictly non-sectarian and open to any young man of Sturgis. desirous of improving himself along these lines by such a use of 2 or 3 nights a week. Ladies need not apply. There's some history here in this town. After Cross left, it would be 45 years before St. Thomas had another resident priest. In an age when church activities were social activities and vice versa, the Presbyterian Church became the place to be. With no resident priest, St. Thomas really couldn't compete. During the Second World War, the church was closed for some time. Coming home after the war, Freeman Steele became senior warden. He replaced the broken windows and bought a new organ, the old having been ruined by the wind, rain, and snow blowing in all those open windows. The buildings were repainted, and an inside restroom was installed. I think that, if I were an Episcopalian back in those days, I would wait for the railroad cars before I came. Come out on a sleeper. In 1955, the congregation decided to call a full-time priest. He was James Monk, and in 1956, a new rectory with 7 rooms and an office was built next to the church. In 1961, the congregation decided they could support themselves and whether they're going to be independent. So they applied for and were granted parish status. Charles Forgeith came in 1962, and during his tenure, the church was redecorated inside, paneling added to the walls, and the woodwork repainted. During Eric Wright's term, from 69 to 75, the present 2-day manual Allen organ was installed, and it's behind that wall right now. And a 2-car garage was back there, was added to the rectory. With the arrival of in 1980, of Tom Newman, big changes came to St. Thomas. Energized by the Curcio renewal movement, the congregation went to work and completely rebuilt the church. To the amazement of the town, the 90-year-old structure was jacked up and a basement dug out of the entire church. The members worshipped at Kincaid Funeral Chapel right across the street for a few months, but then they were back in their brand new church by the spring of 1983. Newman left in 1982, and the Reverend Ed Howe was called to be the rector of St. Thomas in June 1983. He arrived just in time to see the completion of much of the basement work and to assist in the second big project, the complete restoration of the sanctuary. The original frame building, put up in 1891, was stripped to the studs, rewired, insulated, recarpeted, etc., etc. The new basement became the Sunday school rooms, large restrooms with showers, a modern kitchen with custom-made cabinets, and a comfortable parish hall. The old guild hall became an office and library, and the old kitchen became the sacristy. I still wonder where the gym went. Father Ed left in 1987, and since then, the parish has been served by 8 priests, mostly of short duration. In 2015, I became the 20th rector of St. Thomas, and I served part-time in retirement. The most recent addition was the electronic keyboard sitting stage left, which came as surplus after the closing of Incarnation Church in Gregory, South Dakota. Now, there's a lot more to this history, and it's in this little book. Ed Howell's wife put this thing together. She spent a whole year on it, did a lot of research, and she's got photographs and letters and other sources and books and newspapers and archives of the Diocese of South Dakota that she went through to get all this stuff. And there's pictures of the people who were there at the time. This is in the library, if you want to see it. I made a history presentation at the library a couple months ago, I think it was in October. And you can get that, you can watch that online if you want to do that, because I think we're even taping today, are we not? Yeah. So I think that's my part of it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask Karen to talk some more about the Bishop Hare's conservation of the church, because it's a really interesting document. And I'll let Karen tell you about that.
My name is Karen Moore. I'm a member here, and I love it here. If you go through those doors, and if the doors turn either direction, if you open that door on that side, it closes kind of on this document. It's kind of hiding back there. Well, one time, being the nosy person I am, I went back there and I kind of looked up and I thought, ooh, an old document. And I got to nosing at it, and I realized there's a bunch of crossing outs and a signature at the bottom. And I read it, William Hobart Hare. That is the bishop who was a pioneer in the whole state of South Dakota. There's a lot of stuff that's named after Bishop Hare. Church Center, or what is it in Mission?
Yes.
I remember it comes to my mind because it's something I drove past when Sarah was a teacher out there. But I looked at it and I had the same feeling that I got when I was looking through some documents concerning Mount Rushmore, because my dad claimed that he was in the speaker stand when he was a kid. He had driven in an open touring car out here when Grover Cleveland dedicated Mount Rushmore. And I was looking for him on some pictures, never have found him. Maybe I saw him in a book, but I saw that there was a signature on something that they handed me at the State Archives that had been put there by Gutzon Borglum's hand, his pen and his ink on that paper. And I wanted to take off the white gloves and touch it. I just love stuff like that. Well, there it is on the back there, a signature, and I thought, why isn't this in some precious document archive? Well, Mary set me straight. She said, we didn't want it to leave here and go to some archive. We want it right here. And I can't get it off the wall back there. I can't get it off the wall back there because it's screwed to the wall. There's 4 big old-fashioned slot screws back there. But it shows, if you go look at it, you will see that it's written in classic old-time document English. And Bishop Hare, and it kind of reflects must be his personality and his administrative style, because I read somewhere that he came here more interested in helping the Native Americans to become assimilated by civilization and to realize all those advantages. And of course, many of them had other ideas. And so he kind of locked arms with a few Episcopal leaders over that whole philosophy. But he did a lot, and so his name appears. But he crossed out some of the wording of the form itself. He was filling in a form, and it's not a good shot, but we didn't have time or equipment to get a good picture. It's back there. He crossed out some things to improve the wording. He crossed out, whereas these rector, the church, and the vestrymen, church wardens. The Episcopalians have wardens, and I had to learn what that means. That's just people who are kind of in charge of, like, the building or stuff like that. And so he crossed that out and wrote in, kind of very, almost not legible, minister, officers, and people, a lot more plain. And I think he was customizing his form to accommodate these folks out here who were pioneers and gold panners and who knows what all else had come here at the beginning. So he customized it in 2 places. And then he fills in the date, and it was like he said, 5 p.m. at in 1892. So that goes back a long ways, and that's all written here in hand by Bishop Hare. And I think it's kind of too long and involved to try and read it, because it's hard to read. But here it says, William Hobart Hare, and then the Bishop of South Florida. It even records on here the year of when he was bishop, his office as bishop. It was in his 19th year of his consecration, so it was the spot in his ministry that he consecrated, set this church apart for, let's see, it says, oh, I was going to read that, I can't find it now. Oh, this building was consecrated accordingly, and thereby separated henceforth from all unhallowed, worldly, and common uses, and dedicated to the worship and service of Almighty God, and so on and on and on and on. It was made a holy place, and this is the document, and we got it right up on the wall. I was amazed and delighted.
Let me just point out one or two things. One is that what he crossed out was rector and wardens and vestry. And those are technical terms in the church.
Right.
And this was not a church that was established yet.
That's right.
So they couldn't have they didn't have a rector. And I do not believe that the person they had to serve this church was ordained yet.
I think you're right.
That he had a little bit more to go. So he was a minister and not a rector. And the church was not set up yet with the vestry and the wardens, so he crossed those out and said, and the people of the church. Because remember, I said there were just 12 people by the end of the year. So this was the St. Thomas Society that was living in this building. So he just adapted the form, and he was an upright Anglican and doing his duty to God and his country properly.
It was a pretty high church, too.
Yeah.
People didn't probably know a lot about high church
Yeah.
in those days. Thank you for clarifying that.
No problem.
Anyway, I was delighted with this.
Thank you.
So,
Now, in 1983, when they renovated the church, when they jacked it up and then they completely did the inside, then they made alterations to the church to basically accommodate the Veritas, correct?
Yes,
Yes. So would you please talk about the Veritas?
okay. The carving that you see behind the altar was given to St. Thomas by Gwen Davenport in honor of her parents, Jarvis and Jeanette, who were members of this parish. There are a lot of things that we talked about Jarvis and Jeanette about, not the least of which is that was Davenport water that we drank for a long time. And they were very generous to St. Thomas, and Gwen sought to continue that generosity. This is, I think it's called Christ of the Living Waters. And the reason is pretty obvious when you consider the reason for the Davenports' businesses here and then the church. The sculptor, the artist, also spent time here getting ready to create this. And he said that it just seemed a perfect meshing of the Davenport history and the Davenport dams, and it looks like going up Van Arker Canyon, really, when you think about it. What else do I want to tell you?
Where was he from?
Oh, the sculptor?
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you. He was from Denver. Gwen Davenport was living in Denver at the time. And I finally found him on the internet machine, and he passed away in 2017.
At age 88.
Yes. His name was Will something the eighth. Not Martin. Morton. No, not Morton. Yeah, at any rate, that, is, and part of his, that we are so grateful for, is that he did integrate what we already had, because the chairs had been there. And he just married them all together so beautifully.
So is that a specific view or
No.
just a compilation of
No,
areas?
it's not a specific place. I mean, we're not looking at it from wherever.
Yeah.
Is it all one piece?
It is cracked.
All the way to the floor?
Pardon
Is that all, the whole back connected
One piece?
together?
No,
me? No,
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 it has to be
there's,
able to expand the tracks.
Well, I can see the chairs are separate, but I couldn't tell the back altar.
there's this, which has this mounted on it, then this,
Oh, okay.
and this. What a remarkable piece.
When I first looked at it, I thought, that's Jesus panning for gold. And then
Jesus standing for
I
gold.
think that's gone through everyone's.
Well, it's the way they had the sculpture had
Yeah.
so I'm gonna call it the hunker down Jesus.
Yeah.
He's actually panning for souls.
Are there any questions?
Tell about the rails.
Oh, well, these rails are the one and only truly original. They came out of the church, and of course, I remember when they went across, straight across, you do too, Jen, I'm sure. And we're a Scotchy bunch, I think, because we made do and made things last and repurposed like crazy. And so far, thank goodness it's worked.
The pews?
The pews are original. I would expect so, because,
In the pictures, you can see them.
yeah,
The early picture.
there's that picture of Tellens and, yeah, you can see, well, that's kind of a dark,
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
can see that they
but
are.
you can see that there's the same pews.
That was an Easter picture. We were trying to figure out, was it really that crowded? You know, did they have all that stuff there all the time? That would be a little claustrophobic, but we decided to probably, special picture.
In the grand, well, my turn?
in the grand scheme of the history of Sturgis, and this is just me talking, I've always perceived that there's been a relatively bright line between the two theological groups of people here in town. The Catholic community and its congregation and its influence with St. Martin's and all the numerical numbers of people and the like, and then the kind of general population of Protestants here in the town, and the two Jewish families that those of us that grew up here know of, and all of that. I mean, it's really just, the scale has just got two pans on it in one respect or another. With the Episcopal Church being this kind of historical and theological bridge between Catholics and Protestants. So in Sturgis, as this town was evolving, and I don't think we can discount at all, we have to weigh on the scale pretty heavily, the influence of Reverend Erskine, and maybe Father Colombo, if I'm saying his name, Columban, if I'm saying his name properly, of those two gentlemen, and the influence that they had over big groups of people, just numerically, a lot of people. Folks putting money in the collection plate every week, and all of that it takes to make everything work.
And I think, too, that Fort Meade has to be considered in that
Okay,
equation.
yeah. And so the Episcopalians, for better or for worse, were always this real small slice that had to just hang on, and sometimes slipped because they couldn't sustain a full-time pastor here and the like. And so where do you step? You know, do you go to the Catholic Church, or do you go over with the Presbyterians, which were the big outfit when I was a boy anyway, here in town. And Episcopalians, you know, fighting for their place in the sun in this community. That's not a question, I guess it's just my observation. Am I off base? Am I being a weird guy who doesn't live here anymore, or?
I'm a new person, relatively speaking. But I think that's accurate. And that was my mentioning the influence of Fort Meade.
And when the Army left, there went a big, some of that, the support, numerically, if nothing else, for here. Okay.
Of course, you missed one chunk. And the chunk you missed is that English people have always had trouble with Vikings. And we need to put a wall between Minnesota and South Dakota so we can keep them over there. But now the influence of people moving westward just from Minnesota into South Dakota, there was no, the Lutheran Church didn't have a foothold in Spearfish where I was before until the 50s. 1950s. So,
And I'm just, and maybe it's just me personally as this kid who's always, and now old guy who's struggled. We came here in 1954. I was 6 years old. And my ancestors were all Eastern Rite Catholics who joined the Russian Orthodox Church. And it'd take me the rest of the day and you'd all go to sleep if I tried to explain that because I couldn't do it properly. We plopped into Sturgis, and my mom is looking for a place for us. We have a stepdad here in town, and it's me and my sister and my mom with a bottle of holy water from St. Mary's in Minneapolis, and she came here to the frontier with her new husband. She had been a widow and starting her life over again. And so what do you do with David and Mary Ann? And the Episcopal Church in 1954 was, I don't know that they even had the lights on here very often anyway. And that just wasn't adequate for her and for us. And so, where do you go then? Well, Presbyterian Church, of course. It was the center of gravity here in the town, and that's where we went. And there were, over the years, my mom would give her version of the story, and that, well, we were Russian Orthodox in Minneapolis, and we came here, and she just couldn't be a Catholic. She couldn't quite, although ultimately she fit in there. And so you go down this hierarchy of, well, the Episcopal Church, of course, that's next. Well, they don't meet very often, and it's a real tiny group. And then, well, who's next? And then it's just this pecking order that we went down. And I've often wondered here in this community what kind of influence that's been. And when Erskine retired, was that the loosening of the grip that the Presbyterians had on the Protestant community here in this town? I don't know. I've started a fight here now in a church, for heaven's sakes, amongst people that I've known for almost my entire life and other strangers. But it's just something I think about often, I guess, when I come home to Sturgis and I drive through town, and I just have this flood of recollections of things and where we fit in the community. And, why was it that only in 8th and 9th grade, when St. Martin's finally closed, or it started to change dramatically, that we had new kids in the public school? Well, we're Danny Regan, who are you? Well, geez, I live just down the street here, but I went to St. Martin's, and there was a bright line in the town. There was a Catholic funeral home and a Protestant funeral home, and Democrats and Republicans kind of lined up on those two boundaries and the
We
like.
said Catholics and publics.
Yeah, and so, and I don't know if our little beloved town is unique with that, or maybe other communities struggle with these, just different versions of it.
Yeah,
The mixture's
for
different.
instance, up in Meade and places like that, where there were definite ethnic communities that definitely were not interested in mixing with one another, that the mine bosses had a lot to say about that. One story about one of the mine bosses who went to Christchurch Lead was walking down the street one day, and he heard this Irish guy in the bar singing at the top of his lungs. He went in and said, "You are going to be in my choir next Sunday, and you better be there." And, they had power to do that. So,
Well, and I think that this side and that side was true not only in West River, South Dakota, but in East River, where I grew up. There was a public school and a Catholic school. And in our town, there wasn't a Catholic high school, not in town, but there was in Mitchell, which was 22 miles away, and kids went to Notre Dame rather than go to public school. So, that's just the way we were.
What about the stained glass? When do they date to? And then I see where 2 of them are in cases, not in windows, so what?
Well, that's because this room had six windows, 3 on the side. And the church, shall I go ahead?
Yeah.
The church from which they came had 8 windows.
Oh,
So, what to do?
but when was that, and where did the windows come from?
Okay, the windows came from Detroit
Original.
via Rapid City. When we were doing this, there was a business or a couple who did stained glass restoration and repair. And they had these windows that maybe we might be interested in. Well, yeah. And then Maury and Mattie Gersrud donated the 6. And then these 2, they had 2 windows. Well, what do we do? So these 2 were purchased in honor of Morgan Elton and, or in memory of Morgan Elton. God great his soul. And one other person.
So that would be in the 60s?
No, 70s.
Eighties.
It was after they renovated the church. I mean, it was-
Okay,
This was all done
In 83, 84.
in one swell swoop.
okay.
So they had this clear glass before that?
Oh, it was hideous.
Oh.
It truly was. It was just ugly.
Were there like squares of?
No, they were, let me think, they were kind of marbly, multicolored, knobby,
Yeah,
Yes.
you know?
caramel glass, or whatever that is. or-
I don't, yeah, it was just scary. I didn't know any better.
I started to look up the history of where these came from, the church. They came from a French Catholic church, Roman Catholic church in Detroit. And there was this Catholic church, goes back to 1701 or something like that. I'm gonna do some more search on that, because I think that's pretty interesting. Because I'd like to know if I can find at what time these widows were originated.
Yeah.
And then that's, any other questions about the plaques on the wall
Yeah,
were donated to us by Lillian Carr.
okay.
Or did she do it before she died, or did she give it to us before she
I'm
died?
trying to remember whether
Yes.
she gave them to us before she passed, but I think about the time she moved into the nursing home.
That's right. And we used to always say they were the Stations of the Cross, but they're not the Stations of the Cross. They're just little snippets of Jesus' life, you know, little scenes from.
Are they cards?
Sorry.
Are they a card?
I think they're past, aren't they?
I think they're cast.
Or cast?
They were plates, you know, that you put on those tripod little things, you know?
Sure.
And you got 1 month for however many months the series.
Oh,
And
like fruit of the month, but it's the flavor of the
or played it the year. And she collected them and gave her collection then to the
I like the
church.
way you mounted them.
And then we did have them mounted, and I don't remember who did that. You?
No. I was gonna tell you one funny story from me, my funny story. I remember when this happened, I was sitting in that pew. It was a Christmas Eve night, and the Christmas Eve candlelight service, beautiful. And this being the high church that it is. Stand up, sit down, kneel, stand up, sit down, kneel, you know, all the way through the service. And the kneeler had been down, and somebody on this end of the pew put the kneeler up, unbeknownst to me. So, I go over and kneel, and I hit the floor. And I got the giggles, and I could not stop laughing. I laughed through the rest of the service. It was such a shock.
It run the whole thing. So one person puts it up, you're in trouble. Yeah.
Well, right.
She's really aware of her surroundings. Okay, so any other questions before, yes?
Where did the pews come from?
You know,
They were original.
they were original pews of the church, and I think you look at the AR card, and I don't know who did it or the exact date that they came in, but it was very, very, very